You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
And it is a fun educational day.
There's books in the studio.
There are books.
I'm pretty excited about that.
You're kind of, I know you go by the term like hymn nerd, but you're also kind of a book nerd too.
Yeah,
so as am I. I like lots of books too. We're excited because we get to learn something today. So thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for supporting the Coffee Hour. Find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu.
Live uncommon.
Joining us in studio today, Cheryl Swope. She's author of Simply Classical, A Beautiful Education for Any Child. And it is always a joy to have you in studio because I know we're going to learn something. Thanks so much for joining us, Cheryl.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I saw on your blog, as a parent, I enjoy perusing your blog, and saw an article about reading aloud, which is something we do frequently in our household, usually around bedtime. That's kind of one of our ways to wind down before prayer time so that we're calm by the time we get to prayers.
You have to read calm books.
Right. Although we don't always succeed at finding the calm books. But we love reading aloud. And so you wrote a wonderful post about reading aloud. And so I'd love to talk more about that. Why read aloud? Are there benefits to reading aloud?
Why read aloud? There, I believe, are many benefits to reading aloud. I don't know that we can prove them empirically, but I do know that when you contrast reading aloud and introducing your children to print, that you are impacting their brains, their minds, their hearts, their beings more than introducing them to screens and images. There's a good book by Nicholas Carr, C-A-R, who wrote, The Shallows, that's the title of it. The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. He has a lot to say about children and what we're doing to our children's brains, allowing them to spend so much time in the digital world as opposed to the world of print. So one thing that reading aloud does is it introduces children to this wonderful, magical experience of reading a book or being read to. I think there are at least 3 ways that we impact our children's minds. One is in the realm of language. We are sharing words that they might not hear otherwise. Mm-hmm. So we're enriching their vocabulary. We're also reading well-constructed sentences if we're choosing our books wisely, which we want to do. So it's for us, what we found when I was raising my 2, and we do still read aloud today, even though they're older, but we found that language would wash over all of us in a way that was more elevated than the language we were using to each other or just in casual conversations. So enriching their appreciation for language is a big one. Then also the cognitive, just intellectual development that comes from reading aloud. There are some studies that have looked at reading nonfiction instead of just fiction. For boys, often it's how things are built. Those books with trucks and the names of all the different kinds of construction equipment that you can have. It helps children with reading. It helps them with understanding science and processes and all of that to read nonfiction, but then also fiction with the imagination. There's a whole group studying moral imagination, which involves the fairy tales, the portrayal of clear good and clear evil, where it's not mixed together. It was so funny because just the other night, my daughter Michelle, whom you know, she didn't want to play a board game that night. Usually we play board games at night, but she said, I'm kind of tired. Dad, could you read a story? So he's always up for reading a story. He said, do you have one in mind? And she said, oh yes, Toads and Diamonds. I had not heard of Toads and Diamonds, but apparently it's one of her favorite fairy tales ever. It's written by Charles Perrault, who wrote Cinderella. Mm-hmm. So it's this lesser known fairy tale, but she knows exactly where it is. She makes a beeline for the bookshelf, picks it up, and reads. So it struck me, knowing that I was coming here talking about read alouds, it struck me as just a perfect example. I wish we could read it, but I'll just sort of summarize. It's kind of reminiscent of Cinderella. There's this very quiet, polite, kind, gentle-hearted girl who is not loved by, in this case, her actual mother, who strongly prefers, the sister. And both the mother and the sister are very grumpy, critical, unkind folks. And then here's this girl. Well, the girl goes to draw water for the family. It's one of her many chores. It's 1.5 miles away. And as she's drawing water for the family and she has to bring it back, she encounters a woman who's actually some sort of fairy godmother or something, but dressed as a poor beggar woman who asks for the water. And the girl, of course, in her kindness, gives that water to this poor beggar woman. And as she does so, she speaks words of kindness as well. Flowers and diamonds flow, literally, from her lips onto the ground. By contrast, later in the story, flash forward, the girl who's very critical was sent to go to the same well because the mother's thinking, we can all get rich here if you go to the well and you end up with diamonds. So the critical girl went and outpoured toads from her mouth, toads and frogs, because when she was speaking, she was not speaking words of gentleness and kindness and love and warmth. The stark contrast, I just thought we wouldn't have something like that written today probably, but for a child's simple mind, it was so clear what was right and what was wrong. And I think that those sorts of stories have impacted, I know, my children in the sense that she kind of became that over time. She had heard it and read it, and she understood that was the way to be, was somebody that was more kind. So language, cognitive, intellectual, but then also that moral imagination. And then last, just the bonds, the human bonds between those of us who read aloud together. And I was thinking of a friend of mine whose children are all grown, but her husband reads to her at night. That's how she falls asleep. They read classic books that they wish they would have read when they were younger, but he reads aloud to her. Just the wonder of a book bringing us all together. And then you have those shared references, too, for the rest of your lives. So we could reference Toads and Diamonds if we wanted to. There are other books that we reference often from our children's childhood.
Who needs audiobooks when you have a spouse that'll read to you, right?
Yeah, or we just listen to audiobooks.
There you go.
But I feel like audiobooks are like the adult version of this because then we can both sit. I mean, it's also our car trip entertainment. We put on audiobooks. Sherlock Holmes has been the recent fascination for us. But then we're both being read aloud to, and we have this magical experience in the car while we're driving. And it is really fun, and I understand all of that you're saying. What should we consider when we're preparing to read books to our children, or I suppose to each other?
What should we consider when we're preparing? I guess, of course, we want to match the ability of our children to the book that we're reading. So we wouldn't start off with Dickens or Shakespeare when they're 3 or 4, but we can also make sure that we're stretching them a little bit by reading slightly higher than where they might otherwise be. And even your Sherlock Holmes example, you might be too tired to read that yourself at night, but when you're on a car trip and someone else is reading it well, then it's stretching you beyond what you might pick up, which might be more in line of a magazine or something if you're super tired. But having it be just a little bit higher than where we are is a great place to be.
I remember my son, I think at age 4 or 5, using the word preposterous Where did you learn that? Oh, yes, it's in one of the books that we've been reading at night.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Because it's not a word that I use on a regular basis at home in conversations with a 4 or 5-year-old child, but
Yes.
it was just in a book. That's preposterous.
That's a great example. Yes.
So he just learned it from our read aloud time. No, you brought up a great point, matching to the age or level of the hearer, but also going a little bit further just to stretch them a little bit more. I want to talk a little bit more about that, what's appropriate for various ages or abilities or levels, and we'll do that in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back and continue our conversation with Cheryl Swope. You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
You're a miracle. You know that, right? A living, breathing, one-of-a-kind miracle. You were created to stand apart, to share your gifts in the service of others, to make an uncommon impact in a common world. And at Concordia University, it's our mission to help you do that, to live uncommon. To learn more about Concordia, go to cuw.edu.
Welcome back to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
Today we're talking with Cheryl Swope. She's author of Simply Classical, A Beautiful Education for Any Child. And today we're learning about reading aloud with children, or really with anyone. You could be reading aloud with your spouse as well. And before we went to break, we were just starting to broach the topic of age levels or ability levels and finding a good match for that. So what do we need to know when we're considering, reading aloud for a child who's 3 to 5 or, those age groups? I think you shared some different age groups in your blog post as well. So what do we need to think about with those different age groups?
If we start with 3 to 5, what's nice is to have a picture on every page, if possible. And I wish everybody could see, but I have this beautiful book that we read just over and over. It's by Rachel Field. It's called Prayer for a Child. We included in our Simply Classical curriculum, Prayer for a Child. And that curriculum is for children with special needs. I found that having a picture on each page just helped to keep their attention and to focus them on the words that were going on. So I'll just read a few pages from it. It's a little girl, and she's in front of a cozy fireplace. That's one of the things with 3 to 5. Staying with family is a great centerpiece for a read aloud. But it says, "Bless the lamplight, bless the fire." And then you turn the page and you see hands of a mother buttoning the dress of the little girl. "Bless the hands that never tire in their loving care of me." And you turn the page and there's a picture of sister, brother, baby, another sister maybe, or a playmate in the toy box, and a cat. And it says, "Bless my friends and family." The rhyming is so important. I've learned this through creating the curriculum, that children who hear and understand rhyming do better in reading, because when you start to learn about word families like sat, cat, mat, you're much better able to distinguish those from the short vowel of, say, E. So instead of mat and met, you can hear those differences because you're accustomed to what they call phonological awareness. You're accustomed to rhymes. So I love books that rhyme for our children, but I love the illustrations. We want to look for things at every level that have beautiful or realistic illustrations, art. We want to think of them as little bitty art books too, because we're also encouraging or cultivating their tastes. So we want them to have taste for excellence. It does matter what we read.
I loved looking at the pictures when I was a kid. I think I used to want my mom to read faster because all I wanted to do was look at the pictures. I remember this.
Well, and now look at what you do. So you create these beautiful images for KFUO with hymns that coordinate so well with those pieces of art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about for older age groups? What are some things to consider?
For older age groups, so let's say 6 to 9, we still like the family-based or familiar-based settings, but we can go more into, I guess, a little bit more challenging concepts. And Andy, I gave you a book that is a Christmas story. It's a little golden children's book, which we were saying before we started that we all just love them. And I'm so glad they're still around. We include those too. This Christmas story has a picture of the nativity, but then it includes words that are from Scripture. These are not really retellings. These are our true stories. And teaching that age group that this is true is really important.
All right, so this is the Christmas story from Little Golden Books. When the angels disappeared into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go to Bethlehem and see this thing which the Lord has made known to us." They hurried to the town and found Mary and Joseph and the babe lying in the manger. Afterwards, the shepherds told everyone they met about the child.
That's wonderful. And if we all had voices like that, wouldn't it be great? We don't, but we can't worry about that.
I didn't do character voices.
Character voices.
I do character voices too. That's the best part about reading together.
I love doing character voices.
My dad did that. My dad was a DJ. So he had a great voice, great singing voice, big baritone, all the resonance, but he could do voices. So my first being read aloud to was comic strips in the paper, the funnies. He called them, I'll read you the funnies. And he would do the voices. It was wonderful. So we talked about the age group. So then I think at 10 and up, we can start thinking from other people's perspectives. There are books written from the perspective of a cricket, the cricket in Times Square. Or we can also travel back in time. Homer Price, what was it like when he was a boy and he was in this small town? Travel to the Swiss Alps with Heidi. We can take ourselves to different places through books. So we can introduce our children through books to travel. But we can also, I gave Sarah a poem, we can think about how other people see things. The one that Sarah is going to read is from Robert Louis Stevenson's famous collection of children's poetry. At the end, he writes to his mother. So children can envision how a mother might understand reading aloud.
To my mother. You too, my mother, read my rhymes for love of unforgotten times, and you may chance to hear once more the little feet along the floor. It's very cute.
Yes, right. Just how important it is for us. It's not just for our children. It's for us to have that time and take that time to read aloud.
So what about reading for when they get into those teen years or beyond? Anything that we should consider thinking about? They're old enough to read books on their own now and enjoy them on their own. When
we were homeschooling, there was a man named Jim Trelease, and he wrote the Read Aloud Handbook. It's where we really began to understand the importance of reading to children, even when they can read themselves. That was not something that my parents did. Once I could read, they no longer read to me. I don't think that it even crossed their mind. But there are families now, there's a whole movement of reading aloud beyond the time that the child can read on his own. So yes, well into the teen years, as long as they will allow it or be allowed to be moved by it, then we want to keep doing that. My husband, when our children were maybe 11 or 12, I think. He spent an entire summer, might have spanned 2 summers, reading the Tolkien trilogy. I've mentioned that before, but we still marvel at the astounding accomplishment of reading that. A lot of families have done that, but reading it all aloud together, that was a highlight. And I will say, too, that when he started that, they had no interest. They really did not want to read this book. They wanted to read the familiar ones. He said, just give it time. Well, and it was not long before they were completely hooked, and it became one of their favorites. And then they went back and read, I think they went back and read the Silmarillion, maybe independently by that point, the kind of prequel to that whole trilogy. So, yes, we want to keep going. The other night when my daughter wanted Toads and Diamonds, my son said, I want to read my own book. I don't want to do this. And that was fine. So he was down on the sofa, down on the lower level, and my husband then took my daughter upstairs. Well, I wanted to hear Toads and Diamonds. I never heard it. So I came up, and lo and behold, it was not long before Michael came up and joined us. He was hooked. And I was away last night, just at dinner with some friends. And it turns out that they read again last night. So, and I know our situation is a little bit different, but yes, we want to keep reading. Definitely. Or audiobooks, like you said, sharing an audiobook in the car. It doesn't have to be one person reading. It can be audiobooks with good readers, not the robotic computer readers, but
the good, nice, rich British voices. They're fantastic. I love it.
Yes.
You have more books in studio. Are there other books, other favorites you want to share with us before we run out of time?
Certainly. One of my all-time favorites is A Child's Garden of Bible Stories. We want to fill our children with the comfort and hope and truth and holiness of real Bible stories, and we want to let them know that these really happen. These are historically accurate. This is revealing God to a child in story form, but we want to distinguish between make-believe stories and true stories. So I love A Child's Garden of Bible Stories. It's by Arthur Grove, and it's at least second publication from CPH. We tie our writing program to this book. We have a Bible edition of writing, so it's writing and comprehension all tied in with the Bible stories. Another one that I love, and this gets to your point, Sarah, of the illustrations and the importance for our children.
I was eyeing that one.
Tasha Tudor, I love her. This is one.
That's beautiful.
She's such an amazing illustrator. I love anything illustrated by Tasha Tudor. She also has a book of prayers. She has illustrated the Lord's Prayer, this little book, and it's so beautiful. This is the one we include in our Simply Classical curriculum because it is teaching numbers, too. We do want to make sure that we have a lot of counting books, a lot of numbers. We're working on the math as well. But this is 5 eggs in a pretty round nest. It's a beautiful picture of a little bird sitting on a nest with 5 eggs. She has the borders with flowers that are pink and the green leaves. Her attention to detail is exquisite. Then there's another one. This is for Christmas, A Promise Kept. The story of Christmas. Memoria Press put this together themselves. It is straight from the readings of Luke, or I don't know if they're all Luke. They may be, with sacred art on each page. This would be for older students. And again, this would be a Christmas book. So we have a lot of Advent and Christmas books. It's a great time to read aloud.
All right. So you did bring up Advent and Christmas. You mentioned a great Christmas piece. Do you have any favorites for Advent as well, with Advent being right upon us in a couple of weeks?
I kind of like A Promise Kept for Advent, even though it's the story of Christmas. It's talking about what we're coming upon. So I keep that stays grounded. I do not know off the top of my head of Advent books that are in that same classic realm. Oh, Kloria, Kloria. They are just releasing an Advent book, yes, that we are hoping to put in. So that just popped in my mind. It is O Come, Emmanuel.
Yes, I've seen that.
They also have a Latin version. So that's a nice thing for people who are teaching Latin or using Latin in their divine services. Yes, so that one can be a highlight, obviously taking the hymn. And then another one that I like for that kind of time is St. Nicholas, The Real Story of the Christmas Legend, Julie Stegemeyer. This is so important as children start to see Santa Claus everywhere. We can really ground them in the truth of the actual saint who lived. It's St. Nicholas, The Real Story of the Christmas Legend.
Very good. All helpful resources and insights. I've learned a lot today. Have you, Sarah?
Yes. I need to go read to my nieces and nephews now.
Our guest today, Cheryl Swope, author of Simply Classical, A Beautiful Education for Any Child. You can find more at simplyclassical.com. Cheryl, always a pleasure to have you in studio, and thanks for bringing half your library with us. Well, it's probably not even bringing so many books to share with us today. It's great to talk with you.
You are welcome.
You've been listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@KFUO.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.